want to show you today how I went about drawing this gingerbread house. This I think is absolutely adorable, and one of the things that particularly makes it is all of the little details. The little iced Christmas trees, the garlands and the wreath at the top, as well as the roof, I think really give this a certain charm. Now the roof particularly I think is thought of as quite complicated because it's white, and generally people are always concerned about drawing white things. So I'll show you how I went about drawing that. Now before we get started, the full tutorial of this is available on my Patreon. And I've got not only this gingerbread house, but loads of other Christmas drawings in both graphite and colour pencils. Every tutorial includes really in-depth instructions, all of the real-time footage, a full list of all of the colours I'll be using, as well as all of the other materials, sketch outlines, and of course the reference photo. Some of the drawings are reasonably quick, whereas some of them are more complicated but also have a bit more wow factor, like this gingerbread house. Do check out the link in the description. All right, let's get drawing. So I want to start this in the way that I start all colour pencil drawings. I want to be putting down some base layers and mapping out all of the main shapes. So what I want to do is look for the lightest colour that I can see in each section. So for example, on the gingerbread section, the lightest colour I can see is a kind of light yellow. So I can put down this colour anywhere where there is gingerbread. For the icing on the roof, the lightest colour I can see is a grey. So I can put down an extremely light grey on the roof, as well as any other areas where there is icing. And then on the red areas, for example, I can put down just a very light layer of this red. And I'll also in a second be doing the same with green. So I just want to be getting some sort of colour down on the whole of the drawing. Now there's a few different things that I particularly want to be doing here. First up, I want to get the pencil down as lightly as possible. I need to be pressing really lightly so that I'm able to build up a lot of the pencil on top of each other. I want to be able to layer the colours. Now there's a few ways that I'm able to do this. First off, I find holding the pencil a little bit further back rather than really close to the tip stops me from being able to press too hard. Another thing that I particularly want to be doing is trying to get the pencil down in as smooth a way as possible. So for example, here you can see I'm not just going back and forth with the pencil, I'm working in circular or oval motions to try and get that down as smoothly as possible. Now in actuality, I don't necessarily need it to be absolutely perfectly smooth because it will generally get more smoothed out and smoother as I go. But I do like to try and begin as smoothly as I can. So once I've got some sort of colour over the whole of the drawing, I've very roughly mapped everything out. I want to start doing the same, maybe making the colours a little bit closer to the reference photo, and also mapping out some of the more obvious larger shapes. So here I'm going back over the gingerbread areas. The yellow, although I do think it does have some yellow underneath, it's not looking hugely close to the colour of gingerbread. So I want to try and get the colour a little bit closer, and I can use a particularly light brown to do this. But I can not only map in with this colour, I can also use this to mark in some of the darker areas. So for example, the shadow that I've got by the wreath here. And I can also begin to make the edge of the roof line look a little bit clearer. So I can just go around the edge here, marking in the key shapes that I think is going to make my life a lot easier as we begin mapping out some of those shapes on the roof as well. So you can kind of see how lightly I'm working here. It looks very, very muted and faded, and that is exactly what I want. I don't want to have really bright colour at this point because then I won't be able to build more of the other colours over the top or adjust what I've got. So once I've gone over all of the gingerbread areas lightly with this brown, I then want to start thinking about adding some of the details in on the roof. So the roof is made up of a series of tile shapes that have been piped in with the icing. At the top of each of those tile shapes, it has a sort of zigzag that marks the top of each of these. I want to use this same colour, the same gingerbread colour, to just mark in where those are going to be. Now, I had already drawn in my sketch here, and I had marked in where all of these are going to be, so I'm just trying to make those marks look a little bit more prominent. And I can then go over with a slightly darker grey than the grey I used for the base layers to mark in all of the key shapes on the roof. So as I say, the bulk of the roof is made up of these kind of tile shapes, but around the edge here, it is made up of a whole load of drippy pieces of icing. And all of those drip shapes are creating shadows that I can see on the reference photo. What I want to be doing here is using this grey to mark in those shadows and start getting my bearings on what needs to go where. Now it looks a little bit, it doesn't look great at this point, but don't worry about that. This is all just a case of trying to get the bearings to hopefully make life a little bit easier as we work our way through the drawing, because we know what needs to go where. So I can also mark out all of these tile shapes on the roof, and then I can keep working around the side to make these areas mapped in. And I want to do exactly the same for both the chimney and for along the front, so anywhere where there is icing. And then at this point, I kind of think that the base layers are done and I can begin building up all of the colours, really building up the contrast, adding to the brightness. So generally speaking, I want to start with the lighter colours and gradually work my way towards the darker colours. So I'm focusing on the green areas for now. And I'm using a darker green than I used for the base layers. I can begin mapping in all of the shapes, all of the lights and darks that I can see within the Christmas trees, within the garlands and within the wreath. And I'd say that this is quite a time consuming and fiddly job, but it does still create that basis that is going to make it much easier to build everything on. I'm literally using the baubles that I've marked in as a bit of a guide so I can see where each leaf needs to go in relation to those baubles. But I always think it's not a case of trying to get it absolutely perfect. That would be really, really tricky. We just want to try and get it as close as possible. I don't think creating a drawing necessarily needs to be a case of trying to make a photocopy. That's a different thing. So once I've gone over all of the green sections, I do generally want to be working from the lighter colours towards the darker colours, and I want to be thinking about what the main colour is that's missing. So I'm thinking particularly about the gingerbread and thinking about the shapes and shadows behind the gingerbread Christmas trees. So I'm going to move on to a reddish brown, this is sienna brown, and just build up the colour of the gingerbread a little bit more anywhere where I can see this kind of reddish tone. So generally I would say that that is the shadows around these gingerbread figures. Around the door there's quite a deep shadow there. And it also wants to be building up shadows that are created from the icing around the top. And then I think that the gingerbread, although it still has quite a way to go, it is looking a more realistic colour. From here, I'm going to draw my attention onto the icing at the top, and I still want to be building up the shadows a little bit more. So I'm going to move on now to the same grey that I have used both for that very light colour and for when we were marking in the key shapes on the slightly darker grey. This is the French grey, and now I'm using the darkest French grey, and I can use this to mark in all of the shadows. So marking in both where the icing is meeting the gingerbread, there's some pretty dark shadows actually around these areas. But also I can go over these roof tiles, really going over what I did before, but I'm studying each individual section, really looking at the lights and darks on each one and trying to get them mapped out a little bit clearer. Now it does still look a little bit rough and ready, but that's okay. We're going to tweak this as we go. And I can also use the same colour to tweak some of those shadows that I added a second ago. Maybe make the shadows a little bit clearer. It's a nice and dark pencil. So I'm really able to make the shadows look a lot more prominent. So then I'm still working my way generally from the lighter colours towards the darker colours. But I also want to be thinking about the main colour that I think is missing. So from here, I really want to brighten up the red areas, make them stand out a lot more. Before maybe tweaking slightly, going back to that brown I used earlier for the gingerbread. It's looking too pale at this point. And then I can think about using the darkest colour. So I always get to this point of the drawing and I think the main thing that I want to do is build up the contrast. So I can use, this kind of looks like a black, it's actually not, it's a very, very dark brown. And I can use this to make all of the shadows pop a little bit more. So using everything that I've already built up, everything that I've already mapped out, I can use this pencil to really increase that contrast, make the shadows more prominent, make some of the shadows on the wreath, for example, on the baubles, give them a little bit more shape, and generally just tweak what I've got here. It's not taking away any of the colours I've added. I think it just creates a more polished looking drawing. And once I've done that, it's really made everything a lot clearer what needs to go where, even clearer than it was. But it also has made some areas look more muted, so it becomes, again, clearer to see what I need to add. So now I can use the mid grey to go back over some of these more shadowed areas, tweak them and really build up the shapes on the drippy icing section. You can see that the icing does still look white, but it also looks nice and interesting, and it does have all of those different shapes that are within the drips. I can also use this same pencil to not only tweak the shapes around the bottom, I don't want to forget about that icing on the snow down the bottom, but also tweak all of the roof. I want it actually to be reasonably dark, particularly the tile section isn't that light, even though we think of it as white icing, it is in quite a dark shadow. And then once I've done that, I can go back over it, really smooth everything out with the lightest grey, before then moving on to the white and giving a final smooth on the absolute lightest parts of the icing. Now I'm pretty happy with the icing at this point. What I want to focus on is making some of the brighter areas brighter. So going back over the green sections, really deepening down the green that I've got here. Brightening up again those red sections, making those baubles really stand out. And then I want to be tweaking the gingerbread colour, so going back over it with that lighter brown, as well as adding to the shadows with the more reddish brown. It's very much doing the same as what I did before, just doing more of it. And I now want to brighten up and smooth out the gingerbread, so I can use a kind of beige colour to just smooth that out and give it a little bit more of a solid colour. And then I can just work through some of these colours, tweaking a few areas. There's not a huge amount necessarily that needs to be done now. I can tweak some of the shapes on the roof a little bit before adding back in those darker sort of zigzag lines that I added in right at the very beginning. They've got a little bit lost. And I'm going to go back over all of those shadows with that particularly dark brown. Now the final thing that I'm doing, which is very much an optional extra, but I do think really helps these areas pop, is going over it with what's called a jelly roll pen. So this is a white gel pen that goes really nicely over the top of colour pencils. So I can use this to just add a few details that would be quite hard to add in if I don't use this pen. So for example, a few of the white dots on the door, and I've also just tidied up a few of the white icing sections. But after a few final tweaks, that is it. So that is how I went about drawing this gingerbread house. Now don't forget, if you would like to draw this with me, it is available on my Patreon. If you'd like to see how I go about drawing a different Christmas theme, check out this video here. Happy drawing guys, and I'll see you in the next one.